Um, I am a psychotherapist for many, many years now, licensed in 1976. And then I became a certified hypnotherapist, and eventually in the mid-1980s was trained for 5 years in doing past life regression therapy. And that was very important. Not only was it very helpful for people, but it prepared me, little did I know at the time, but it prepared me for doing regression work with people eventually who had had experiences with extraterrestrial beings. So people started coming for that reason, to check on their unusual experiences with extraterrestrial beings. They started coming in 1991. And when the first one came, and it was very successful in the sense that she changed from being totally freaked out and traumatized to feeling very blessed and privileged and honored to have been chosen by those extraterrestrial beings to be interacted with in various ways. And so that was a good start for me. And I thought, oh, if anybody else ever comes, not thinking they necessarily would, but if anybody else ever came for that purpose, I felt confident in being able to handle that. Well, about 2 months later, another lady came wondering if some of the strange things that she had experienced could possibly be extraterrestrial encounters. And I worked with her for about 10 years, many regressions, probably 50 or so. And she did a lot of growing and learning. So did we both in her experiences with many different types of extraterrestrial beings. And she ended up feeling very calm and relaxed about the whole thing and thinking, well, that's okay if that continues. And then another person came, and I worked with her for 12 years, probably 60, 65 regressions, and more kept coming. And by 1994, the 17 different people I was working with for extraterrestrial experiences at that time, they were starting to ask me if I knew of anybody else who was having these experiences. And they wanted to talk to somebody else who had, because they were totally alone, as far as they knew, in having these things happen. And so after about the fifth person of the 17 asked about that, I decided, okay, let's get these people together. So I started an experiencer support group in 1994, and that group continued on until this past winter, when I was very busy emptying my house, fixing up my house, selling my house, which was in Claremont, east of LA, and then eventually moving to San Diego, where I am now. So that group is not continuing now, but I would be perfectly willing to start a new one in the San Diego area if anybody would show interest in that, which they might, you never know. Some people are coming to me there for regressions, for extraterrestrial experiences. So during all the years that now I've worked with nearly 1,800 people in doing the regressions, and some of them have had many, as I have mentioned, and so it's probably about 2,700 regressions to extraterrestrial experiences that I have had the great privilege of conducting. And boy, have I learned a lot. It has been absolutely intriguing. And along the way, after a few years, I had an experience myself with a particular group of beings. That was in relation to the making of a crop circle in England, because I have been a crop circle researcher now for 27 years and was very busy doing that when this particular event happened. And then there have been 3 others that I know about. They've all been either neutral, in other words, not thrilling in terms of the beings, and not negative at all, not in the least. And some of them have been just fantastically wonderful. And so during the years of regressing all these people and meeting many other experiencers and reading about it, talking to people about it, I've begun to realize that even though the press, the public media about UFOs and extraterrestrials tends, I think, to present it in a very negative way, a very scary way. There's a lot of emphasis on the nasty little gray beings who are sort of robotic and totally lacking of feeling, and just so sort of hard-hearted, if hearted at all, and how they frighten people. They don't seem to have any caring for people at all. And I do think there are some of those beings that do come, and I don't blame those people for feeling that way. But what has been amazing to me, and continuingly to be very rewarding, very gratifying, is that so many of the beings who come, whom we consider extraterrestrial and other dimensional in many cases, that they are not only kindly, but they really appreciate the human race. And so many of them are extremely concerned about the human race. Now, I don't know how they do it, but these beings, so many of them, a vast number of different types, presumably on different planets, that they know so much about us. I mean, we're just learning a tiny bit about them, but they know so much about us. Now, maybe they do something akin to what some of our people do, that is remote viewing. And they also, most of them seem to be very psychic, very intuitive, very knowing. They're very telepathic. They can know each other's thoughts. They can know our thoughts. And even though they're dwelling at very vast different distances from planet Earth, they seem to know an awful lot about what's going on. Now, I'm amazed, like in a very small point of view here, just from a particular person, that I have been amazed at first. Now I'm not amazed when it happens, but that sometimes in doing regressions to a person's extraterrestrial experience, the beings will say, now we have a message for Barbara. And so the client, lying there being regressed, still in the regression, will repeat what the beings are saying. And it's very often directed just very specifically to me. Now, what is so amazing, well, there's all kinds of things that are amazing about that from my point of view, but also they, way out there, I mean light years away from here, they know very often what is in our minds, what's in our thoughts, and they will address that in talking to me. I mean, I think that's incredible. I mean, I could be sitting right near somebody like you and not have a clue, except maybe a tiny bit from your facial expressions, but not know what's in your mind. And most of us, I think, don't know what's going on really. We don't know accurately what's going on in each other's minds. And yet those beings from out there do know. And they also know what's going on in the whole world. They know all of the really bad things. They know some of the good things too, and marvel at them. They marvel at our emotion. They marvel at our singing, our dancing, our acting, our performing, our having really happy laughter and joyous family gatherings, friendly gatherings. They admire our artistic ability. There's so much about us humans that they really do appreciate, and they say they don't have very much of that or any of that, some of them, themselves. So they really look at us as quite amazing beings in many ways. They also look at us as very dysfunctional beings, unfortunately, in some other ways, particularly with the way that so many people are treating each other, probably not those of us in this room, presumably, but all the people who are killing each other and waging wars and gouging each other, cheating each other, being greedy, being viciously competitive, one country against the other, one race against the other, one group of any kind against one political party, one baseball team. I mean, this is really a land of great competition. And we find it very stimulating. And we're encouraged to be that way. I think even as little children, we're encouraged to be on the winning team or have the best friend or be part of the best clique in high school or whatever. And we just are raised with that. So I don't see that that's going to change very much in the future. But that sort of attitude has led us into some really awful things, going for greed and money and polluting the land and the air and so forth. You'll be hearing more about this this evening. And these beings out there are aware of that. So there are many, many indications that a lot of the extraterrestrial beings really do care about humanity and are trying to get us to do something about it, to improve life on Earth. This could be a fantastic planet full of beings, human beings, if we would just get out of some of this vicious competitiveness in so many ways and start cooperating and caring about each other. So I've come to think that in many ways, some of the extraterrestrial beings, many of them, care more about us humans than we care about each other. Now, isn't that weird? Something wrong with this picture, I think. Anyway, from my regression work, there's been a lot of things that have come up. One of them started coming up in the early days of my doing this work about extraterrestrials abducting a person, and when the person was on the spacecraft, they would show sort of like a holographic screen, very realistic looking, of Earth catastrophes, of huge earthquakes and massive floods, massive fires, rising oceans, rising bodies of water everywhere, and hits by comets and hits by solar flares, that type of thing. It was coming up in a lot of the early regressions I did in the 1990s. And for a while, some of us doing this work were thinking that they were showing these disastrous scenes that seemed almost three-dimensionally to be right there, but it was holographic, probably. We were assuming that it was to study the human, the abducted human, to see what emotional reactions that human would have. Now, maybe that is part of it, could very well be. But also, as time has gone on, I've gotten the impression more and more that these beings are showing these disaster scenes almost like 3D, very realistic, very vivid, colorful, emotional, like being in a 3D movie, if there is such a thing, of being in one. And now I'm thinking that it's more that they're trying to warn the abductees, who can warn other humans, that these things not only do happen, fires, floods, earthquakes, and so forth, sometimes, but that there could be a time when a lot of that will be happening. And more, I think that a lot of these beings are showing that kind of concern and are trying to warn us. And then another really nice aspect of the extraterrestrials is that they have taught many experiencers, abductees, contactees, to heal people. They've taught them healing skills so that when they come back, they can do healing. And many people whom I have met who are Reiki healers and other kinds of healers, when I get to really know them, I realize that they have had extraterrestrial contacts probably all of their lives, here and there, and that they have been taught these skills and encouraged to use healing skills with their fellow men, or even with the animals on Earth who need healing. And they've taught people how to heal themselves. In addition to that, some of my very earliest regressions on up until now, they have taught some of the abductees how to heal great masses of people after Earth catastrophes would happen. And in each one of those cases, they've said they've been teaching the person how to heal a whole big group of people, maybe even a whole culture of people. And they say to the person, you may not remember this now, but you will remember, you will get triggered when the time comes, when one of these disasters will happen. And you can immediately use these skills. I think that's very thoughtful of them, don't you? Also, some of the ETs have rescued humans from really bad situations, particularly the ones I know of where the people were already experiencers, already having something to do with particular groups of extraterrestrials. And so that when one of those people would get into trouble, get into real danger, the extraterrestrials from wherever they are would know that and swoop in and save them. So I had a number of instances of that type of thing coming up. One of the very well-known UFO researchers from way back, when he was a little boy, he was experiencing these beings. He didn't remember this until I met him, and he was probably in his early 60s, and by his late 60s I did a regression and found out, yes, indeed, he was having these encounters with a wonderful group of beings all of his life. Anyway, when he was about 2 years old, two and a half, just a little toddler, and he lived out in the country, and he wandered away from his home, went out the back door one day, across a field, and fell down into a very deep cement culvert with very steep sides, and he couldn't get out. I mean, even if he'd been grown up, he probably couldn't have gotten out of it. And so he was crying and lost and just didn't know what to do, too far for his parents to hear him if he would call out. And a couple of extraterrestrials who knew him came. They detected this from who knows how long a distance, and came and brought him out of the culvert, took him halfway across the field, pointed him in the direction of his house, and he went home to safety. And then there was another lady I regressed, and she went back to age 4 when, very unfortunately, her own grandfather was sexually molesting her. And the beings knew that. She, of course, did not like the experience at all. It was beginning to be very painful, in fact. And the extraterrestrials who'd already been working with her came to her and pushed the grandfather away, swept her up, took her out of the house, put her in the garden shed, and put, as she described in the regression, an invisible blanket of warmth over her to comfort her. I just loved that. And then they carefully locked the door of the shed so that the grandfather couldn't get in. Eventually the parents got her out, and she was saved, and she was okay. And then one of my clients, actually the first one who came in 1991, she at one point of time had a very severe ear infection. And one night she was aware that 3 tall white beings came into her room. They rolled her over on her left side because the infection was on the right side. And out of the corner of her eye, she could see that these 3 very tall, thin, white beings, very white, paper white, that they were doing something in her ear. And they were fixing whatever was wrong. And then they left, and she went on back to sleep. And in the morning when she woke up, her ear was perfect. No trace of infection whatsoever. And another lady had a severe sinus infection that just seemed to go on and on and on. And I suggested that she might ask her beings, her extraterrestrials, to help her with that, knowing that they were already teaching her healing, so obviously they knew of healing themselves. So she asked them in a meditation, and they came very soon thereafter. When she was there, allowed her to stay right in her bed and worked with her sinuses and cleared that all up, and then left. And there are many examples of healings that have been done of people, individual people, in addition to those. For instance, one lady had a severe blood disorder, and they took her on board the ship, put her through a tunnel-like machine, sounded very much like our MRIs, and could really see what was going on inside her. And then they took her into another room and suspended her. It seemed to her it was about 6 or 7 feet up in the air, just suspended in the air, nothing under her. And then all of these little laser beams, pencil-thin laser beams, came from the walls, from the ceiling, from the floor, and penetrated her and stopped the progression of that blood disorder. Now, about 6 years later, that woman went to the doctor, and he said, "You have a very unusual blood disorder." She had not known that at the time of her abduction with this experience I've just mentioned. But the doctor confirmed that she did have that. And he said, "You know, it's amazing that it seems to have developed to a certain point, but it stopped getting worse. It stopped developing." And so we figure that, and the extraterrestrials in that healing experience with the laser beams, they told her that she had the blood disorder, which she didn't remember consciously until we worked together on it, but that they were not able to cure the blood disorder, but they could stop it from developing further. And that if they didn't stop it from developing further, within a few years she would definitely die. So this woman, that was back in the 1970s, that healing by the ETs, and she's still going strong, very healthy, very alive, very much with us. So that's wonderful. Another man I worked with quite a number of times in regression had a severe heart problem. Now, when he was in his mother's womb, that was when he had his first ET encounter. So what happened is that he came for work. He was suspecting that maybe that's what was going on with some of the unusual happenings. Maybe he was actually having extraterrestrial encounters. So we went back to the first encounter he had ever had, if indeed he had had encounters. We never want to assume that somebody has been having them. So we went back to the very first encounter, and he was in his mother's womb, and yet still conscious, still thinking, still aware. And among all the sloshing and the heartbeat and the gurgles and the digestive things going on from his mother inside the womb, he was, one night when the mother was sleeping, all was pretty quiet, he was aware that there was somebody right there outside the womb. And a voice, a male voice, started speaking to him, saying, I'm here to help you. You have a congenital hole in your heart. And if I don't help you, soon after you're born, your life will finish because you'll be bleeding from that hole and will not be able to live. So therefore, I, the being, am putting an invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in your heart to keep the blood in the heart where it should be. And so he did that, and my client, little fetus inside, could feel some real warmth, a really nice feeling, sort of a warm energy coming to him, and just, received it. And then he was born, and he lived, and he was abducted, and the same ET, who was gray, but probably about 5'6" or 5'7" instead of the little Zeta Reticuli grays. And that same gray being, every time he took this boy, who grew up to be a teenager and a young man, middle-aged man, so forth, every time he was taken, it was the same being whose name was Mazu. And my client knew that it was the same being because he was the only one in that group of beings on that spaceship who had beveled eyes, much bigger eyes than we have, and they were faceted, like one of those little glass bobs that hangs down from a chandelier. So Mazu with the beveled eyes, and about every year or so, my client was taken as he was growing up and as he was adult to again refurbish, repair, add to the invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in his heart. And that kept him growing. He grew up to be a big 6'4" burly guy who did physical labor all of his life. And then finally at age 48, he was diagnosed with a heart problem, but he lived to 48 without a problem. And his doctors at that time, at age 48, directed him to go into surgery to have a heart operation. And his wife happened to be a surgical nurse and got permission to be in the operating room as the surgery was happening on his heart. And so she witnessed that when the doctor opened him up, he said, "Oh," out loud, "this man has a huge hole in his heart the size of a silver dollar, and yet it's just barely leaking blood. I don't understand." So that probably was because of the invisible electromagnetic strip over the hole in his heart. And of course the doctor fixed him up the way that our doctors do, and he lived another few years very vigorously, and then suddenly died of a coronary attack. But he lived a good life up till about age 54 or 55, with the ETs having helped him. And we do hear complaints, and I understand this, from many people about the little gray beings who do poking and probing and taking skin samples. And of course people don't like that, and putting in implants. And the thing that people object to the most, and I hear some people kidding about it, unfortunately, is having anal probes, like a colonoscopy that we have. But this is not where we voluntarily choose to go and have a colonoscopy. Anyway, the anal probe, which is very disliked by people, but I have found out from the beings, if they are to be believed, and I think they are, is that the anal probe is their way of telling about the whole health of the person that they have abducted. In other words, they want the person they have abducted to be as healthy as possible and live a good, long life. And so they check them physically, and they can get more information about the person's health in all regards, they say, by doing this anal probe. So what seems to be a really nasty, horrible thing, according to many people, may actually be beneficial for those people. I think that is worthy of note. And they want to check people. That's what a lot of their medical checkups are about with the abductees. They want to know how we're doing with all the pollution we have of our crops, of the soil, of the air, of the water, of just about everything. And they can tell how the population is doing by testing their abductees, good representatives. Some people think that this may be the reason for cattle mutilations. I don't know if that's true, but I think that that makes sense. It could very well be the case. So on the ships, they do quite a lot of different ways of healing. Some of my clients have been subjected to, lying on a table and having great streams, great bright light shining upon them, particularly shining on the part of their body that seems to be having a physical problem. And a couple of my clients have been laid on a table on the ship, and they've had what seemed like a rolling bar of light, like starting at their feet and sort of rolling up over their body as they're lying there and past the top of their head, doing healing as it's coming along. I wish that we had things like that. It just sounds wonderful. And some feel that they're healed by laser beams of light, like the woman I told you with them coming from all directions, or some people are lying on a table on the spaceship and they have a laser light coming from one angle, just one beam of light that pauses over the malfunctioning area and does the healing. And some of them do just straight hands-on healing of people. So they heal infections sometimes of people, broken bones. One of my women had a broken leg, which was really hampering her work and what she had to do in life. She asked the ETs for help, and very soon thereafter, within a couple of days, they came, they took her, they healed the broken bone. Well, how wonderful. And another lady was having a lot of lower back pain. And one day she was driving along in a car with her sister in the passenger seat, and they noticed that there was a big blue beam of light coming from, through the back window from above. And they were mystified. And eventually the car motors started to sort of peter out and slow down, and they pulled off the road because it looked like the motor was going to die out. And the blue beam was still there, coming through the back window of the car, and they didn't know what it was. She knew by then that she had been experiencing extraterrestrial contact, but she didn't really know for sure if the blue light was from them. So the two young women jumped out of the car. There happened to be a field right there, and they started running across the field, and the blue beam followed my client. She was 21 at the time, age 21, and hit her right in the lower back where she had been having this chronic pain. And it felt so good that she stopped running and just surrendered to it and absorbed it. Her sister, in the meantime, kept running. She was not the experiencer. And anyway, her back started to feel better and better, and when it felt completely good, the beam just seemed to retract, go away, and they turned around, went on back to the car, and went on with their lives. And the healing remained. She was thrilled, and I was thrilled to hear that. So they want us to be healthy, they want us to live long lives. And if you happen to be an experiencer, you're already in touch with beings, it's well worth your asking for help if you need it in terms of health. They've also sometimes saved people from terrible, terrible car accidents. Either the car accident didn't happen when it should have happened. Miraculously, one of them went over the other car rather than crashing with it, things of that sort. Or sometimes the person has been thrown out of the car in an accident, but landed very softly because of a being there. Now this brings up the subject of angels, because angels do the same thing. And I think there can be confusion between which are extraterrestrial beings and which are angel beings. I think there's a tremendous similarity. There probably are differences. The angels do not apparently have physicality and never were physical, although they may look like it, look like beautiful people. The extraterrestrials do certainly seem to live on spaceships and on different planets. So they may be different groups of people, they may work together, they may have some of the same abilities. And a number of my clients, I'm sure this is true of others too, have been downloaded with information. Sometimes that information is about technological improvements, new inventions, particularly for things that would be really helpful for us and our planet, like free energy devices. There were really quite a number of people who've made these wonderful inventions, but they're not allowed to produce them because that would make a big dent in the oil industry and the coal industry, etc. And the powers that be don't want that to happen. But anyway, they're getting downloads of information and they're actually making them. Let's hope they get to produce them at some time. And some people get downloads of being warned of upcoming crises. Some are downloaded with spiritual realities that they had not particularly been aware of before. Some are downloaded about other dimensions. I don't know about you, but in the last number of years, 10, 15, 20 years, I've been increasingly aware of other dimensions of reality. I think people like us who happen to be here have probably heard of the Ascension process that is apparently going on to help us to evolve into the fifth dimension, where life would be so much more decent and humane and loving and cooperative and collaborative, mutually helpful. I hope that that happens, and many people are getting a lot of downloaded information about that. And then people, some of them, are getting downloaded about the Galactic Federation. So some people who have extraterrestrial experiences get to actually visit the Galactic Federation, which is a group of many, many planets, many, many types of beings, many societies of beings in the universe. So there is this big group. I've heard about it from many different sources. And unfortunately, planet Earth is not part of it. And because we're not advanced enough, it doesn't mean that we're not smart enough, but we're not advanced enough in consciousness and in benevolence as a whole Earth society. Fortunately, some of our people, many of our people are benevolent, but as a whole humanity, we're not benevolent enough and caring enough to qualify for being part of the Galactic Federation. And many of these beings would really, really like us to evolve enough to be part of that. And sometimes extraterrestrials come here to Earth and actually live among us. And of course, they look human enough to do that. I know of groups, I haven't met them personally, but I know of groups like there's one in northern Italy that lives in the mountains. And I think it's called the Summa group or Uma group. And very tall beings, very human looking, but usually about 7.5, 8 feet tall. And they're trying to spread goodness here just through their thoughts, their vibrations, because they don't go out of that mountain too often because they look like us, but they look so big, they kind of get stared at and pointed at. So that's a shame. But anyway, some of these beings who live anywhere among us, any towns, pass for human beings And they try to find people who are sensitive enough in certain ways to be able to receive channeled information from these beings. And when they meet people whom they can detect through their telepathic abilities to be sensitive enough to receive messages, then they go about the business of trying to train those people to receive the messages from some of the higher beings, all for the point of helping humanity. And sometimes these extraterrestrial beings really try to personally help scientists and engineers. An example of that, a real life example of that, is a man named Bill Tompkins, who lived in San Diego. People find him on YouTube, I guess. And I met him once. He spoke at the Orange County MUFON group. And as an elderly man, very elderly, still very bright, very on the ball, very, very sharp, suddenly in end of August, or maybe it was early September, fell, bumped his head, had an aneurysm and died. But he was in great health and great mind at that time. Anyway, Bill Tompkins has said that in his very high engineering work and inventing work, that in his office for many years, and this was in one of the big corporations, his two secretaries, women, were Nordics, Nordic extraterrestrials. And that when he'd be working on inventing a problem, or a problem in inventing something, that one of them would just come over and tap him on the shoulder and say, you know, do it this way, or add this equation, or make this improvement. And then the invention would totally work. And, you know, he wondered, this went on for years, and he wondered about these two women. How did they know all these things that he and his engineer colleagues didn't know, and found out from them that, yes, they were Nordic beings from another planet that were helping, particularly helping with inventions that would be helpful to humanity, not harmful. And then there was Valiant Thor. Have any of you heard of Valiant Thor? Okay. So Valiant Thor was a very human-looking extraterrestrial from Venus, he said. He came with a woman and a brother, I think, too. And anyway, he came to the Pentagon. He came to Maryland, landed a spaceship. He was the captain of a spaceship, still is apparently, and then got over to Washington, D.C., and entered the Pentagon and announced himself as Valiant Thor from planet Venus. And they actually accepted him in. He looked like a very attractive human man. And by the time he got to the Pentagon, he had a nice business suit on, looked very presentable. And they actually gave him a place to live, like an apartment in the Pentagon. He lived there for 3 years. Now, during that 3 years, he was trying so hard to help humanity by saying, I can give you all kinds of free energy devices. I can teach your engineers. I can train them. I could do this all over the world. The whole world could be running on free energy. But guess what? The powers that be, the military top people and government top people, corporation top people, did not want those changes to be made because their profits were coming from all of our polluting technologies. So finally, he stopped trying to persuade them and went back to his spaceship, which allegedly is in another dimensional form, in other words, invisible, but parked over Lake Mead, keeping an eye on things. Anyway, he did what he could to help. And there may be others that we don't even know about who are here to try to help. So some of them do appear very, very physical and very human. And some are here to help us, and they appear very human, but they're much less dense. So they don't go for handshakes with people because you wouldn't probably feel them, or they wouldn't feel like a regular person feels, more solid and more physical. But nevertheless, some of them are here. And then there's the whole subject of hybrids, ET human hybrids. And in the last several years, I have put a great amount of attention into this. In the earlier years, I was very aware from people's abductions that many of the beings were creating hybrid beings between them, the ETs, and humans. And those hybrids were not human enough to live and function here on Earth. And they didn't look human enough. They wouldn't have passed. They would have had a terrible time, would have been ostracized. So they have remained living on the ships with the ETs or living on some of the other planets with them. So that's what I was aware of all through the 1990s and the first 10 years of the 2000s. And then I began to meet people here on Earth who look like humans, but for some reason, I instantly, with two of them, one after the other, had a total hit that they were hybrids living here. I had not heard of that before. So the first one I met, I think it was in about maybe 2008, was Cynthia Crawford. Do any of you know her or know of her? Cynthia Crawford, who lived in Apache Junction, Arizona, east of Phoenix. And I met her at an international UFO Congress and met her at a kiosk putting mayonnaise on a sandwich from the refreshment concession. And I was aware of somebody coming alongside of me and reaching over for the mayonnaise that I was reaching for. And of course, I looked to see who this person was. And I did a startled double take, and she said, "What? Like, why are you looking at me that way?" And I said, "Oh, well, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you remind me of a hybrid." And she smiled and she said, "I am a hybrid." So I got to know her. I was fascinated. So here was an ET human hybrid living on Earth. And I got to know Cynthia very well now for a number of years. Unfortunately, she died at the end of the summer, or in September or maybe early October. And I went to her memorial service November 4th. Anyway, she died of a brain tumor and at about age 67. And wonderful, wonderful person who channeled the extraterrestrial beings whom she had in her genetic makeup and had many contacts with. She channeled them while making sculptures of them. And there were about 20 different kinds of beings that she channeled and made sculptures of those kinds of beings. And people would be given the sculptures or they would buy them. And she received so many phone calls and emails and letters about how those sculptures had affected them, because when she was channeling and making them by hand, she was bringing through their energy and a lot of their information. And when she first told me about this several years ago, I thought, oh, well, I don't know, that's kind of preposterous. But there were so many reports that the sculptures really helped people and even healed them sometimes of things and gave messages to them. So I think it's very, very likely that that really happened, that the energies coming through actually were activated in these clay sculptures. She had this brain tumor, and she knew chances were not good about her surviving. And she did the chemotherapy and everything and didn't take care of it well enough. And during that whole process, I was talking with her quite a bit. And she said she wasn't worried about it because the beings whom she's very much in touch with promised her that when she would leave the physical body for good, that she would be with them working on the ship, and that she would be able to do even more good working from the ship with the ETs than she had done here on Earth. So she was actually looking forward to that. You know, there's always that huge adjustment, I'm sure, when you're aware that you're going to lose your life. I mean, that's the biggest thing you could possibly lose ever. And yet, there was this promise that she went forward with, believing that she would be doing even more helpfulness to humanity by being right with the beings on the ship. Now, whether that means she would be one of those beings or not, I don't know, but I think that that is certainly a possible thing. So, pardon? Her name? Cynthia Crawford. You can probably find her on the internet. I know she used to have things. She's probably still there. I haven't looked recently. Anyway, after meeting Cynthia, a hybrid, a couple of years later at another UFO Congress, a man I knew brought a woman over to meet me, and I took one look at her and had a surprised expression on my face. And I said, well, I hope you don't mind my saying this, but you remind me of a mantis being, mantis extraterrestrial being. And she leaned forward and she said, good for you. I am a mantis being. Now, what it was about her that made me think of a mantis being, I don't know. Mantis beings are very tall. They could be at least 8 feet tall, and they're very, very thin. They have huge eyes. This woman did not have huge wraparound eyes, and kind of a triangular shaped face, very, very long limbs. Well, she was tall and she was thin, and she did have long limbs. I began to realize as I knew her better. Anyway, she spent a whole week with me, about a year after meeting her, and I felt convinced that she did have a lot of mantis extraterrestrial in her, and had all kinds of psychic skills and telepathic skills with animals. And I mean, I just saw one thing after the other. Neil met her because you were giving that conference, and I brought her to the conference, And she got up and spoke for a few minutes. Wonderful, wonderful woman. She lives in North Carolina. And then it developed from there on. I began to meet more and more people who are hybrids. And the word gets around sometimes when you're interested in something. And I found myself invited to 3 different gatherings over a period of about a year and a half. Gatherings where there were extraterrestrial experiencers and hybrids. So I got to know quite a number of them. And then in the spring of 2015, I began getting phone calls and emails from a young man, writer, well, in his mid-40s, I consider that young, a young man named Miguel Mendonça, and he had somehow become aware that I was somebody who was knowing some ET human hybrids living here on Earth, and started calling and asking all kinds of questions. And after a few of those calls, he said, why don't we write a book together? I'm a writer. I'm poised at the computer all day long. I can do a lot of this. Why don't we write a book together? So we did, and that book is called Meet the Hybrids, The Lives and Missions of ET Ambassadors on Earth. And I have some copies of that over the table if any of you are interested, as well as my other 2 books, Alien Experiences, and the first book, Crop Circles Revealed. I'm still a crop circle researcher after 27 years, visiting a couple of thousand at least crop circles almost every summer, starting in 1991. Anyway, the hybrids, they are a very special group of people. We chose 8 hybrids. Some of them Cynthia recommended. Some of them Miguel found in England. 5 of them are in the US, 3 of them in England. And we did long, long interviews with them and found out a lot of commonality between them. They were all individually interviewed. None of them heard each other's interviews. But we found out that there were a lot of common things among them. Number one, these hybrids are here completely for benevolent, altruistic purposes. They're here to help humanity. They're here to raise consciousness of humanity, raise consciousness away from greed and competition and self-serving acts, from ego, being stuck in ego, away from belligerence, from warmongering, from killing each other, from polluting the air, the earth, the water, and to help us toward peaceful behavior, cooperation, helpfulness to each other, kindness, working collaboratively, helping all lives be healthy, helping all lives to prosper, all lives, even the poorest of the poor, as Mother Teresa used to say. Here to help us in loving all humanity and all life. So they're trying to help us move toward a higher consciousness and more spiritual awareness. Awareness of something that they are all aware of, and that is that we are all one. We're not only one with all human beings, even though, look, we look like we're separate, don't we? We look like we're separate beings, and we've had that ingrained in us, at least in my growing up and my life. I've been aware of how much individualism is emphasized here, just from the very earliest times. Oh, you're different than your brother. You're smarter than your sister. You know, all this separateness. Well, we don't like that family. Well, we don't have anything to do with that group of people. You know, I mean, it's insidious. But in spite of all that conditioning, we really are one. And we're one with all the beings in the cosmos. So these hybrids emphasize, like their beings whose genetics they have, emphasize that we are all part of the great creative source. So those extraterrestrials don't worship a God or a Jesus or an Allah. They don't worship anything, but they respect and appreciate and feel and have a real sense of being part of the great creative source, that everything is part of the great creative source. So even those strange humans way over there on that little planet called planet Earth are all part of the great creative source. And they also, these hybrids, are trying to help us to be aware that there really are extraterrestrials. You know, an awful lot of human population probably doesn't even think about such a possibility. We're so educated that we're it, you know, that we're the only intelligent species. And just now, finally, for a few years, there's public talk in this country, at least, about maybe there is life out there somewhere. Maybe there's microbial life. In the meantime, we're overlooking the fact that there's very advanced, incredibly intelligent life, far more advanced than we are, probably far older as a species than we are. And I find that a lot of people in my life, including in my own family, don't really care. I mean, they know that there's some talk about extraterrestrials, but maybe they think, like I used to, that it's science fiction, or it doesn't have anything to do with us, or why bother? It's more interesting to put our attention to all the public media here, all the fantasies going on in movies and television series and all of that stuff. Anyway, these hybrids want us to be aware that there really is a universe, the whole cosmos, full of very intelligent life forms, and that some of them are extremely wonderful. And so they want us to be aware of these ETs who try to help us and try to guide us and to keep us from destroying the earth. Also, a lot of these beings are trying to help us to evolve into the fifth dimension. Okay, why not the fourth dimension? If we're third dimensional beings, why not the fourth? Well, a thought that's been put forward is that the fourth dimension is where we go after we physically die. That's a whole realm, a whole dimension, a whole frequency of energy that's not physical, but very, very conscious. People after death live very vibrant lives, but they don't have physical bodies, but they have plenty of consciousness, plenty of beingness. So that's not what we're being encouraged to develop into. We're encouraged to remain in physical bodies, but of a lighter frequency, a lighter vibration in the fifth dimension. So the fifth dimension has been described by various people as one where there's benevolence and cooperation and easefulness and a lack of stress, and where there's helpfulness, where there's no war anymore, there's no greed, there's more equality. There's more, well, what we would call humaneness. I don't know if the word humane is really that appropriate anymore because of what so many human beings are doing harmfully to other human beings. But anyway, a benevolent, enjoyable existence. So that would be wonderful if we could do that. So these hybrids, ET human hybrids who live amongst us, are very psychic, they're very telepathic. They have all kinds of skills like psychokinesis. They can move things with their minds. They're very empathic. In other words, they could be in a group of people like this, and if somebody has a stomach ache or a headache or a backache or something, they could pick that up. They would feel it in their own body. So that has its blessings and its disturbances to be that empathic. And they love having encounters with their extraterrestrial beings. They don't consider being taken away by them abductions. It's like a homecoming. It's like, oh, wow, last night I got to be with them and be on their ship, and I was so happy because these are very fine beings, very loving, unconditionally loving. And these hybrids feel that they're very guided by their extraterrestrials. And they're guided also by spirit guides. And these hybrids are all very spiritually advanced. Now all of these hybrids were in previous lifetimes, or some of their previous lifetimes, they were the type of extraterrestrial being, or beings, plural, whom they're made up of now. Each one seems to be made up of at least 3 different species of extraterrestrials, all who work cooperatively together. So the types that they're made up of, these are just the hybrids I know. There probably are plenty of others whom I don't know. Anyway, the types of beings are Pleiadian and Pleiadian Syrian, Syrian warriors of light, Syrians from Sirius B, Arcturian Zetas, blue Arcturians, who, by the way, are very beautiful from a human point of view, and almost translucent, shiny blue skin. I've seen artists' renditions. In fact, I will show you one. And mantis beings, very kindly, very benevolent. Lyran beings, reptilian beings. Now, there are a lot of different types of reptilians. I think that generally speaking, reptilian ETs, among all ETs, tend to get the worst rap. You know, people are frightened of them. Some of them are very big, muscular, burly, and sort of commanding seeming, egotistical. But some of them are very gentle and friendly and wonderful, helpful, nice. The kind of guys you'd really like to know, even though they look like big reptiles. Anyway, there are many types. One of them is called Phagian, that group that one of the hybrids has as part of her makeup. And then Zetas, small Zetas, and tall white Zetas. And then one of the hybrids is from a dolphin-like race, actually looking more like a gray ET, but with dolphin-like skin and living on a very, very watery planet. And then one of the hybrids has interactions with a group of beings called camelopardians, who have a very different kind of face, looking kind of like a camel, our camels on Earth, and also with Pegasians, who look a little bit more horse face-like, and with Quabar, which is a group, sort of a glommed together group of beings that all work very cooperatively together. And the beings who create these hybrids, they really do this because they want to help humanity. But they couldn't come here and survive here. They don't look enough like us, and they wouldn't cope with our density, with our bacteria, with our viruses. And so since they can't come here, but they really care about upgrading, uplifting, raising the consciousness of humanity, that the next best thing they can do is create the hybrids who are human enough that they can live perfectly well here. So these hybrids, whom I know, they were all born here on Earth. They were all born of a human mother and a human father, but at various times before birth, they were added to with extraterrestrial genetics of the few different species that want them to do this benevolent work on Earth. So in other words, some of them were created as hybrids when they were in their mother's wombs. So they were already advanced from the embryo state to the fetus state, and then the mother was abducted and was given an injection through the womb, wall of her stomach, and then the wall of the womb, and into the fetus, an injection of extraterrestrial genetics already mixed together. And that fetus became a hybrid and was born in the regular way that we do it, and grew up in the regular way that we grew up. In a couple of cases, before the mother was even pregnant with the hybrid, the ETs got together and combined 2 or 3 of their species' genetics with the father's sperm already taken from him and the mother's eggs already taken from her, like in a little petri dish, I suppose, situation. And they created an embryo out of all that mixture, so with the ET material in there, and then abducted the mother and implanted it in her womb, and that began the life of that hybrid. There's just one exception that I know of the 8 hybrids we worked with, and that is that she was born in the regular way, and then at age 6, she was injected with this mixture of extraterrestrial genetics and became hybridized at that point. So none of them knew all the years that they were growing up that they were hybrids, but they all felt really different than everybody else, even different from everybody in their family. And they all had a very strong sense that they weren't really somehow from here, that somehow they were from out there in space. And how baffling. You know, nobody else they knew felt that way, but they did consistently. And they had different things about them physically, many of them. One of them had a whole different blood type that isn't known to us because of the ET genetics. Another had different bone consistency, which was discovered after she broke 2 or 3 bones over the years of her growing up experience. Then they really began to test her bones, and they were definitely of a different consistency. A couple of them had organs that would usually be in the abdomen, but were up in the chest area. One of them had thumbs that really flared out at the end, but not the other fingers, just the thumbs. Actually, she was the sculptress, Cynthia, so that worked nicely for her. So there were these different variations, and one had different muscle tone, much weaker muscles, and wasn't allowed to ever play sports or to be too physically active because her muscles just wouldn't take it. So they each have a mission here on Earth to help humanity. And missions involve things like teaching, training people in good skills, encouraging and training psychic skills in people, training people in telepathy. They were teaching classes, doing individual counseling, teaching workshops, writing books, anything they can do, to help spread the word that we can really grow and develop and raise in consciousness. And so they're here just doing their work, not out for fame or fortune or to be known, just in their own local areas, just teaching classes and so forth, and helping people individually. I think it's very nice that they're here. Since I started speaking publicly about them, giving whole lectures on Meet the Hybrids, and of course the book, that many people have come forth and said, I think maybe I'm a hybrid, because I'm very psychic, I'm very intuitive. I've always felt that I don't belong here. I always felt that I'm from somewhere else. I have regular ET encounters, and they're very positive, and I love those beings. I feel great love from them. I really identify with being out there and not from here. I've always felt I don't belong here. And I have a very strong sense of service and mission. So hopefully there are many more of those hybrids among us than I'm aware of, or probably any of us are. Well, I'd like to show you some pictures at this point. You've got one up there of the Pleiadians, and that's one of the kinds of beings who are in some of our hybrids. And also, besides anything to do with hybrids, they're just very human-looking beings, and very intelligent, very fine, more spiritually advanced than we are. And this picture, now these two people are allegedly human. However, I show them because Billy Meyer in Switzerland, are any of you aware of Billy Meyer? Okay, I see some. Well, he, for many years, has seen and filmed UFOs over his ranch, or his farm, I should say, high up in the mountains in Switzerland. And he had many, many contacts with the UFOs that came. They would land, and women like this, who looked just like this, would come out of the ship, and he'd have rides on the UFOs sometimes. And so these look like two Nordic-type Pleiadian beings. I found out eventually, I thought this was a real picture of these real Pleiadians for a few years, and then somebody from an audience said, no, those were two actresses or two people who were filmed publicly for some reason. But they do look, Billy Meyer verified that they do look exactly like those two beings, the left one from the Pleiades and the right one from the DAL, D-A-L, universe. And this is a close-up of the one who looks just like the Pleiadian. So you can see very human looking. And here's an artist's rendering of one of the Nordic beings. They're called Nordic because they're usually tall, very often blonde, blue-eyed, and nicely built. And this is one of the loving types of beings that occasionally visits human beings. And sometimes there actually are people who want contact with extraterrestrials, and people who welcome the downloading that comes to them from the crafts up above. And I think I missed one here.
Click on previous.
That's not seeming to work. Need a little help here with this?
You can use the arrows.
Yeah, there's arrows right down
Here.
here. See that?
Or maybe
Do I need
keys.
this pointing toward that?
Let me show you. So right here is previous and next. So you can click that.
Oh.
You see that right there? Previous.
Oh, okay.
This one.
Yeah, let's stop on that one.
Then you can.
So
you-
do I need to point this every time?
No, you to go forward you can click anywhere, but to go
Oh.
back you need to click right there.
Oh, okay, thank you. So here's a man who's open-armed, open-hearted, open mind, wanting to have contact with a UFO and with the beings in the UFO, because he has been having very inspiring contacts with them.
The other side.
Well,
The other side of the mouse.
what's that?
The left button on the mouse.
Oh, the left button, yeah. Thank you. Okay. And this woman is receiving inspiration from the beings in a UFO. She's being downloaded with information. Sometimes the downloading happens when a person is up and around and awake, and sometimes it happens when the person is so deeply asleep that the person can't even be awakened, and because all this downloading is coming in. And a man in France, whom I regressed, he said that he had this, he drew the painting after having an experience with this kind of being who said was highly advanced and highly spiritual. And he also had experiences with this kind of being, very beautiful, very wise, very knowing. And then many people have experiences with beings of this sort who kind of look or remind them of angelic beings. They don't have wings, but they have that about them, that really high spirituality about them. And many people report in their abductions, their experiences, that they are visited by glowing beings. They can barely even see the features of the glowing beings, and they seem to be just incredibly, unconditionally loving beings. And down toward the lower half of the screen there is a being. Some of them are just semi-transparent, so they're probably other dimensional, in a dimension higher than we are, not as dense and physical, but just as real, as intelligent, and as loving. And here's a very loving being, just looking out brightly. That I love it when I'm doing a regression and somebody is in the presence of that kind of being, and describing them. Sometimes they're almost breathless in the experience, describing the being. I've never, ever met anybody on earth like this, they say. And then some of you have heard of the Ashtar Command, very highly evolved group of beings in space. And then in the lower part is a being here. And a lot of these beings are not only radiating light, but radiating symbols, as you see depicted here. And this being, very loving, very active third eye, there, his psychic intuitive center. And female beings, very often they're described as sort of dazzling with light, as these beings are. And the Galactic Federation, you can see a community here of various kinds of beings, extraterrestrial beings from different planets, some of them looking more human-like from other planets, some of them looking different than we do. And there's a man in the middle there in the white, a man who's been taken for this experience. This is just a closer view of these two and the different types of extraterrestrials. But the nice thing is that they're all working so cooperatively together. And this one, some of them are very, very intense. And people describe the way that they look in their eyes, just so intensely, so directly, as if they really know everything. And then this may be an other dimensional being who sort of seems to be floating here, floating in another dimension, but again, dazzling with light. It's one thing that comes up again and again with people who have experience with the really advanced ones, the spiritual ones. They talk about the light, and sometimes they talk about orbs of light that are full of personality, full of information, full of love. And this lovely being down here, some of them are just described as so gentle, so peaceful, so loving. And this one, again, one of the dazzling with light beings. Kindly beings, very knowing beings, wise beings. Look at the head on that one, the shape of the head of this wise extraterrestrial being. And some very much more human. I think that the artist of this picture caught beautifully that sense of just direct caring and compassion and openness that this one has. And some do not even let us see their faces. We don't know what their faces are like, but they definitely seem to come from somewhere else, some other realm. And this one, the more human type, very direct, very caring, very loving. And a female, caring, loving being. And this man, Nordic type. And this one, very, very direct. This type very often comes to people and gives messages like, shape up. Shape up. You can do it. You can help out in this particular way. And this one, again, very loving, probably somewhat other dimensional. And this one with the light there down at the bottom. His heart center is very lighted, meaning he is no doubt unconditionally loving. Kindly, kindly beings. And wise beings of all kinds. It's wonderful. I think that some artists have been able to capture that spirit of these kinds of beings. The Ashtar type, again. Lots of light coming from the hands. So many of these beings seem to be great healers with light and heat emanating from them. Another Pleiadian type, Nordic type. Very intelligent and very knowing, very caring. And these semi-transparent beings, many people have described these. They'll wake up in the night and see beings standing by the side of the bed. And I've said, well, would you describe the beings? And they'll say, well, I can sort of see through them. But they're there, they're here, but they're not just like us. They're definitely something else and from somewhere else, but they feel good. I feel safe with them. I do not fear them. And a number of people have described their encounters. They'll wake up and they'll see a glowing being, sometimes a blue being like this, by the side of the bed. And that's the beginning of an ET encounter. And these very tall, very thin, I actually met beings like this and had an artist draw the picture of this. I met them up in some sort of environment way up in the air, and they were very kindly, very loving, absolutely wonderful. And here's one of those orbs of light. Some of my experiencers get amazing information. One recently did get from a really big orb, probably about half the size of this room, that came into a gathering she was in. And it gave information about really helping out certain conditions here on Earth. And then this man, I include this picture because even though the extraterrestrial being doesn't look, from our point of view, like a really loving, caring, wonderful being, at least I don't think he does, but he's doing this remarkable healing work on this man and probably upgrading his spirituality and his consciousness as well. And many of the beings do that sort of thing. And I love this picture because it shows some of the healing that they do with light to people whom they've taken for this experience. And I'm just going to leave that picture up as we continue a little bit more. So many people are actually inspired to do their own mission by the extraterrestrials. So a man I regressed recently was driving over the San Francisco Bay Bridge, or his partner was driving over the bridge, and he saw this big UFO, and then he was involved in the UFO experience. The driver pulled over and was switched off. He wasn't even aware that this was going on. But Syrians and Blue Arcturians and tall whites, like the Elohim, were there, and a council of beings, and little green beings. They were all on that UFO. And they said that what they do is activate people's DNA to their intent to do their mission that they are basically here to do. I think that there are many people walking around, and I tend to meet some of them, who have a sense of mission, but they don't know what it is. Or they might already be doing some of it, but they're just not sure, that they're doing what they really are supposed to be doing. And they don't necessarily even know where that sense of mission came from, but it's there. And so they'll ask to do a regression to find out about that. What is my mission? Where did this come from? What am I really supposed to be doing? So a person usually doesn't get to wonder about that seriously until they might be in their late 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s or 60s. I'm having them come younger and younger now, which is good because they're getting to it sooner. And in regression, they get very clear answers from their extraterrestrials about what they are here to do. And it's a relief for them because then they can go ahead and get on with doing it. So this man, Eric, I was starting to talk about, on the spaceship, they put him in a horizontal cylinder and they immersed him in blue liquid. And in that liquid, he was completely submerged, and he was able to breathe, surprisingly enough, and he breathed in particles of light. And he was told that immersing him like that was to remove all the trauma and pain and suffering and DNA that he had had in previous lifetimes, like clear out all that stuff that happened for probably hundreds of years before this lifetime, and yet was still somehow getting carried over in him. And then he sat in a circle of, like a council of various kinds of extraterrestrial beings. He thought of them as wisdom keepers for their civilizations. And they gave him a mission, and that was of helping people who've suffered greatly in previous lifetimes, like he had, by using the light of the Elohim, which they said the Elohim are energetic orbs that appear here and there on Earth. So he was supposed to work with these orbs, the Elohim, and the angels and the seraphim. Now these are names from way back, from biblical times, and he had no relation to that before this experience. And that he was supposed to work with them to extract the dense energy from people built up in this lifetime and previous lifetimes. He said the seraphim, those orbs, remove people's suffering, and the Elohim bring in the light of God in columns of light. And they said to him, it's time for humanity to return to the divine. They also told him that ant beings, ant-like extraterrestrials, come to Earth to train warriors in our Earth military to harness the powers of nonviolence. Now, of course, our military are very well trained, aren't they, in being violent? And of course, we see a purpose for that. But these ant beings are coming to work with the very same military people to show them there's a different way, even though they're military people, a way of nonviolent, and to really harness the energy of that and use that energy. And these beings, these ant beings, also work with male-dominated organizations, including the military, businesses, corporations, and so forth, government agencies around the world. And they are here, these ant beings, to raise consciousness, not aggressiveness, to work away from aggressiveness. And so they're here to raise the possibilities, other possibilities, for resolving differences than those that we have been tending to use. And they also told this man, Eric, that mantis beings have been surrounding him with unconditional love. And that the mantis being's message is, it's only through compassion that one person can make a difference. And of course, a group of people being compassionate can make a difference too. And when one is open to compassion, a field of love is generated in the heart of that person. And that energy touches everyone in that person's environment. So anytime you feel compassion, the energy of that is spreading out whether you are aware of it or not, and touches those around you. I think that's really pretty nice. So there just are so many more examples I could give from my practice of the ETs helping the Earth, but many different species have been saying to us, you've got to really stop many of the practices that you're doing on Earth because you're polluting it, you're ruining it. It's almost past the point of no return. Now, we hear this in some of our news programs, and they know it too, and they are very distressed. They don't want to see the human race have to end. They don't want to see the Earth ruined. And they keep warning experiencers in one way after the other, stop ruining the Earth, stop destroying your oceans, your air, your water, your forests. It really counts. And for goodness sake, stop all this nuclear proliferation. Many, many of the species whom I know of through this work have been extremely concerned about Earth, not only ruining the Earth, but if we start sending off nuclear bombs or nuclear explosions of any kind, that will not only ruin and end all life on Earth, but that proliferation, that pollution will spread out through the solar system and beyond. So some of the planets who send their beings here from beyond our solar system even are concerned that they may be ruined too. And one of the beings to my people said that if the Earth gets so destabilized from nuclear destruction would probably be the way, that really sets up a ripple of destabilization in all the other planets beyond the solar system too. Because things work remarkably well when you think about it, about all these planets and stars and galaxies, and they pretty much, most of the time, these heavenly bodies stay where they should be. They don't run off course and collide with each other. But if Earth destabilizes itself so much with nuclear detonations that it will really jar our place in the universe, and that will be affecting the place of the other planets, even though there are great distances between us. So this is really serious business. So I'm going to finish with this and open it up for questions. We might have a few minutes for questions, if you have any, or comments. Yes.
I love this, but I have a lot of friends, they say, stop contact this demonic.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear those last words.
They was my friends, they all tell me, because I'm from church, they say, okay, don't talk to them, don't contact the demonic force.
They think of the ETs as a demonic force.
And how can I respond to them? I want to know.
Well, that's a tough question because some people are very dedicated to that idea that extraterrestrials are bad and they're doing bad things and they're a demonic force. There are some extraterrestrial beings whom we do not like to have experiences with. Plenty of people have attested to that, because those beings seem to be more self-serving. They don't seem to be here to help us, to help ourselves. They're just doing whatever they feel is important for them to do. So, but that's not the whole picture by any means. And even some of those beings, I was really surprised in finding this out through regression work, even the ones that seem to be more cold-hearted or mean to the people they abduct, even some of them turn out to be doing something helpful. You know, they may be scary. And the extraterrestrials, at least any of the ones that I know of, they don't smile. They don't, many of them don't look kindly. They don't have the musculature and the nerve structure in their faces to smile. We're used to people smiling, or people, you know, whom we like. People we tend to feel friendly to have a friendly expression. And they don't. Even as you could see in the pictures, you know, some of the Nordics, they weren't out and out smiling because they probably just don't have that musculature and physiognomy to do that. But they may be still very kind, wonderful beings. So to your friends who think they're all demonic, I think you could say, well, at least you've heard from this source, from somebody who's had a lot of experience with all of this, including some of my own, that they may not look friendly or helpful, but that doesn't mean that they're demonic. And that there are many that do come across as being, even though they don't smile, as friendly and loving and very caring about us and caring about the earth and humanity. It's just that those people don't know about it yet. So all you can do is just say that, and they'll take it or they won't. You can't really change their mind, but you can add this extra input in there. Thank you for asking that. That's a good question. Yes.
Can I add to your question? I guess tell your friends to think Star Trek, think Star Wars, and like potential life, right? You're essentially calling all the life in the rest of the universe, filled with all the planets and stars, demons. So pretty much, they're believing that the universe is just full of demons, which is not so. I guess for question-wise, are you familiar with the raw material?
A little bit, the raw material. Mm-hmm. I'd like to make a comment about what you just said. One of the things about the human race is that we seem to love drama. And in almost everything, the movies, the television shows, books, whatever, anything that's fiction, we always have to have a bad guy, right? We always have to have a negative one, and then the good guys battle with that in one way or the other. They overcome it, hopefully. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But anyway, Star Wars and Star Trek may have some truth in them, I think, but they're fiction. And I think that they're a great example of our human race, in that even when we're projecting our human ideas out there into space and the space fictional characters, we've got to have drama, or it wouldn't sell. It wouldn't be exciting. So I wouldn't worry about that. I mean, but just realize, oh yeah, okay, yeah, that's another, yeah, there we go again. We've got to have an enemy out there somewhere. Just like our own government always seems to be lining up the next enemy, the next country to have a war with. I mean, you can see it, you hear it on the news every day. And this has been going on for a long time, ever since I can remember. And it's true when you really think about, look at the Game of Thrones, which I was just really introduced to recently by my grown children. My God, I mean, there's got to be an enemy. There's got to be a bad guy. There's got to be somebody bad. There's got to be somebody or something that you fear out there to make the drama. And that's true of Star Wars and Star Trek too. So I just think it's part of the human condition. I don't think that's necessarily real. I mean, even if everything in Star Wars was true, I don't think it is, but even if it were, it doesn't necessarily mean that there would be big, dark forces out there. But we humans really buy into that. It's amazing. When you think about the conditioning that we've all had since earliest childhood, it's really pretty amazing. And I'm amazed that so many millions of people buy into these series, television series, for one, or movie series sometimes, where there's definitely an atrocious antagonist of some sort. There's something to be feared, something to be fought. And the good old Wonder Woman. Well, I loved Wonder Woman, but that means that there has to be some really bad thing that Wonder Woman and Superman and Batman and so forth are fighting against, or there wouldn't be any story there. So we're very addicted to that. Yeah, Kim?
I just wonder if you would mind telling your crop circle story, with your husband, and
I can hardly hear you.
if you would mind telling the story, your crop circle story with your contact.
The crop circle.
When you were in England and you went with them when they made the crop circle and your husband laid in the middle of it. Would you tell that story?
The story.
I was in a crop circle and my husband was lying in the middle of it.
Yeah. When you found it the next day.
Um,
Are you thinking of Patty Beers?
No. He told Yvonne and I that story. It was funny.
You had an experience with a crop circle, apparently.
When you were on the tour, taking your tour, and you wanted to see a crop circle made.
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, in the late 1990s, an extraterrestrial being who continued to channel through my client, who was an experiencer, and he said, I was already researching crop circles every summer, and he said that if I wanted to, the next summer when I'd go over to England to research crop circles, that I could be taken for the making of a crop circle. That's what you're thinking of, yeah. And that in order to do that, I would have to really want to, and I would have to ask out loud of the beings without knowing who the beings were, or even that beings were making the crop circles. But this being from Antares was saying that, yeah, they were made by beings who had come. And so it took me 6 months to get the courage to do that. And finally, the day before I was flying over to England for crop circles that summer, it was 1994, actually, I was driving along the 405 freeway for about an hour and talking out loud in my car all by myself, talking to them, not knowing who they were while driving along, and saying, okay, I'm ready. I would really like to be taken for the making of a crop circle. And then I went to England, and about 3 weeks later or so, I realized that it was the last night before the last day that I would be seeing crop circles that year. And as I was going to bed that night, I asked again, and almost immediately saw 3 beings coming toward me. I was in an inn in Salisbury, England, and they looked like silhouettes because the night light from outside was behind them and it was dark in the room. So I saw these 3 shapes. They seemed short, they seemed to have big heads, tapering down, and they came toward me, and I lifted my head from the pillow, and they saw that apparently, and they retreated back toward the window. And then I thought, oh, they don't want me to know that they're here. Okay, so put my head down and closed my but I peeked and they were coming toward me again, and I closed my eyes and didn't know anything until later. I mean, I slept the rest of the night till the alarm went off. Well, the next morning, I happened to be the one to discover a new crop circle from a double-decker bus I was riding in, and gathered 3 friends, and we were the first ones in it. And it was really a magical, wonderful experience because it was so fresh and it was crisp sounding, like when you pour milk into Rice Krispies, a little snap, crackle, and pop. Yeah, that little sound was in the laid down crop. It was beautiful, fresh. And then I had a regression done on me about 3 or 4 weeks later, and it got the whole detail of being taken up by those three beings that came into my inn room, and onto a little craft, and we went, and how the craft made the crop circle with a big swooshing noise from the bottom, and it fit the way that they did it fit exactly the pattern that was made. So it seemed like I was taken for the making of that particular crop circle. Thank you for asking about that. Yes.
One more question. I got a question. Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
So, through the channeling, has any ETs shared information about what could potentially happen to the planet?
Oh,
Because
yes.
I was speaking with a professor from Stanford just a few days ago. He's saying that the tipping point of the planet, in regards to global emissions, in 3 to 5 years, it will be irreversible.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know what are they thinking about it and what have they shared with you?
Yes, well, there's been quite a bit of channeling. I haven't mentioned all that I even could mention tonight. But they're all saying the same thing, that we're getting perilously close to really ruining life on Earth, even without a nuclear detonation. Just with the kinds of pollution we're doing, we're losing the coral reefs, we're losing one species after the other. There are more and more illnesses and sicknesses that people are dying of that we wouldn't have to have if it weren't for all the pesticides and the poisoning of this and that and the other thing and the chemtrails. So they're very aware that we're doing all of these things. We're aware that we're doing them too, but we don't seem to be stopping them. So again and again, the channeling is calling upon certain people that the beings have contact with in particular, and saying, please rise up. Like one of the groups said, those of you who are good people, who don't like to see these polluting, ruinous things happening, you've got to come up out of the silence. This really hit me in the eyes there. Come up out of your silence and do something. You know, really fight for stopping this disastrous stuff that's going on. And they also pointed out that the wealthy people who earn money from all these polluting ways that we have, they don't want to give up their fortunes. They don't want to give up their income. They want more and more and more. So they're going to hold on incredibly tightly. But somehow we, of the less greedy people, really need to do something. So I don't know what to say about that, but I hope that we will do something before it's too late. And one of the channelings recently said that we're almost at that tipping point now without realizing it. And they say our scientists know about this, and their scientists are trying to warn us. And then there are people like in our own national government who deny that there's any climate change going on. So why make any improvement? There's no problem, according to them. But there definitely is. Yes?
Do you have any information about the Ascension event and splitting of timelines, the null effect?
Timelines is a very interesting notion that I must say I don't know. I'm familiar a little bit, don't know a lot about that, but apparently whenever we make an important decision as a collective or even as an individual, we kind of go down one timeline rather than another. If we'd made another choice, we'd go down another timeline. So that could be true of all of humanity and of the earth. That what we could make choices now I mean, I don't know how because of the people holding on, but we could potentially make choices and go down a really good timeline and have a much more pure earth. Some of these beings would really like to see, you know, an equality of food distribution for everybody on the planet and a quality of material well-being, a quality of wealth for everyone. And it could happen. I mean, we have enough to go around. It's just that it's all scooped up, or a lot of it scooped up by certain people, certain factions. Do you have some thoughts about the timeline situation?
Well, I'm centered around the raw material, the law of one, Shar, as well as all the things people say on Gaia as well. And basically, from a lot of the aliens, their consciousness is above, it's evolved in a way where it's above the linear time experience. And they talk about the nature of time, how everything is in the now simultaneously, and there's infinite parallel realities. And basically, the existence of infinite parallel realities alleviate the paradox of whether things are predetermined or if there's free will. So all decisions, all results, all endings simultaneously exist in the now, and we navigate through these through choice. And there's already versions of Earth that already played itself out because time is all simultaneous, and there's versions of Earth that does that goes on until the sun dies, I guess. But
I have a question.
Okay.
How can we have a session with you?
How can you have a session with me? Well, you could take my card, which is over here on the table, and contact me. I am doing regression sessions for a number of different purposes that people come from, and I'm doing them in San Diego now, in my new condo. Yeah.
We do need to close up, but she did ask that she wanted to say one more question, so we're going to have to end it up.
Okay, last question?
Margaret, do you know Angela Thompson-Smith? You met her?
Yes?
And she did her book, Voices from the Cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
And she, over a period of 5 years or so, interviewed 19 alien species through remote viewing.
Yes.
In her book, she actually asked them all the same questions, and it's on a spreadsheet that's about a mile long. And why, too? You can't actually print it. It's impossible.
Oh.
But it's really great because she went through all the different races, asked them the same questions: why they're here, do they believe in religion, you know, all the different things like that. And so, if anybody wants to read about something where they've actually spent it was almost 10 years actually going through, talking to all these people, remote viewing, and getting all their answers, and you know, and all these people and why they're here, things like that.
Yeah.
It's
Good,
called
Angela.
Voices from the Cosmos by Angela Thompson-Smith. And there's another person that was involved with it, and I can't remember his name.
Maybe Paul Smith.
Really actually an excellent book, and it comes with a Excel spreadsheet. that,
Oh,
you can
I
print
have
that
the
and
book,
look at
but
that
not the
book by yourself.
spreadsheet. Yeah.
I can send it to you by email. But it's
You
wonderful.
put it in the computer?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Well, yes, very good. And I know Angela, and we shared a room for a few nights at a conference, so had very good talks with her. Yeah, very nice person. Can we sneak in one more?
Yeah, she's the last one.
Okay, you're the last one.
Through your work, do you have any information as to why beings would follow a family line or bloodline?
Oh, yes, I didn't hear every word that you said about,
Why beings would follow a family?
why the beings follow certain family lines or blood. Yes, they certainly do seem to do that. And I'd say almost everyone I've ever worked with who experiences extraterrestrial contact has somebody in their family who has had these experiences too. Usually a parent and maybe a grandparent, and then if they have children, at least one of the children, sometimes more, or grandchildren if they have grandchildren. So, and it's not all species of ETs that follow that genetic line, but some of them definitely do. I think it's one of their ways of learning about the human race. So if any one of you think that you've had experiences, you might ask, if you haven't already, your family members. And very often a family member, especially an older one, because this hasn't been known for terribly long, like a mother, a person your age, a mother might have had experiences up to a certain age, maybe middle age, and never knew what to make of it, and wouldn't relate to the question, even though she'd had experiences, because while she was having the experiences, it wasn't ever talked about. So they don't recognize. Or sometimes people will get triggered by somebody in the family who does remember and wants to know, like maybe yourself. And they might think, oh, well, maybe that was what was happening. And then they might start remembering certain incidents. So a clue, well, there are a lot of clues that people have had experiences, a whole long list of them, but it seems to me that people who have a close UFO sighting, that is close within probably a couple 100 feet or so, which is pretty close, rather than a little dot up in the sky, people who have those sightings, chances are very likely that they've actually had an encounter, that they don't, well, that either that they do or they even don't remember. That's very possible. Yeah. And then, of course, people who have missing time that they can't explain, or wake up with certain markings on their body, and they get you, how, there's no way I could have done that during the night. Or people who have certain fears that don't seem to have any rational reason for them. Things of that sort, or glimpses of remembering waking up and seeing beings in the room, or light coming into the room, orbs coming into the room sometimes, things like that. Or people reporting that they were missing even though they hadn't been aware that they were missing. There are lots of things like that. Yeah. Okay, well, you've been a great audience. Thank you so much.